We are here today to talk about AI skills for the modern clinician, and I'm so delighted to have collaborators, Dr. Alexis Gonzales and Dr. Sunjya Schweig, on with us today. So this is really a treat. So I'll just kick off. First, I'm Sunita Mohanty, the CEO and co-founder of Ultralight, formerly Vibrant Practice, but really excited to share with our community a bunch of interesting and relevant resources around how to stay current with what's happening in functional integrative and longevity practice and the intersection of technology. And the most kind of top of mind thing for many people is what skills are do I need? What do I need to be on top of as so much is changing and how I do my job and how what AI is enabling. What does this really mean I should be doing, I shouldn't be doing, I should be leveraging technology for? And so it's been really fun to watch Lexi and Sunjya kind of evolve this topic of what is the real skill set that clinicians need as they're jumping into things. And I'll just give a second on each of them and their background. So Dr. Lexi Gonzales is the senior AI implementation specialist at Ovation Labs and is a functional medicine doctor with her own practice. And she's practiced at some of the top practices in the Northwest area. And so she's over the last kind of year and a half or so really found her space in being a leading voice in this intersection of tools and practice and actually kind of implementing things into clinical practice. And so really delighted to have her here. And alongside Dr. Sunjya Schweig, who comes to us from California. He's the founder of the California Center for Functional Medicine and also an advisor and very accomplished educator alongside Lexi to a number of companies and top institutes in the space. And so, and what I love in watching Sunjay speak about his evolution over the last couple of years with AI is just how supercharged you are at always testing new things and figuring out how to bring them into your actual practice, and you're so skilled at being able to share what you're finding value in and what you're not. And it's very exciting to see how you two join forces to put this topic together. So thrilled to have you here. Thank you both for joining, and I'll turn it over. One last thing I'll say is if you have any questions, there is a Q&A function, so feel free to do that. You can also raise your hand. I'll be monitoring for Q&A and for any comments. We'll have time for a larger Q&A at the end of the session today. So with that, I'll kick it over to you two.
Thanks, Sunita, and thank you so much for having us. Sunjay and I have been we call ourselves a band of two, but we've been taking this tour of like how we actually equip clinicians with the foundational skills to apply universally to all these different AI platforms and operating systems and tools. And when I think back over the past couple of years, we were so focused on the tools themselves and giving very specific skill sets for this very specific scribe tool or operating system. And what's been super cool is to actually have and see and recognize and be able to teach the foundational skills that we've seen surface through all of our, times that we've lectured and spoken with clinicians. So we're super eager to be able to like share what those foundational skills are. I think what's also exciting is sharing what our new friction points are with implementing AI that has developed over the past couple of years, and really what we see as being the next evolution of how we actually enhance, cognitive preservation for clinicians with the appropriate use of AI. So yeah, anything else to add there, Sunjay? I'm super excited to be here with you as always.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. Hi to everybody out there, both live as well as future folks watching this online. And no, it's just a really, really critical topic. Obviously, AI and various platforms have really taken over in the last few years, and yet we're still at the early days of this transformation. And So Lexi, always a pleasure to share the live or virtual stage with you. And, I think we just both get a lot of energy out of working together and talking about this and trying to help people, as we talk about this, we'll talk about this wave, this tsunami of information, tsunami of platforms and of AI capacity. And so we really want you, each individual person, to be on that wave, and ideally with some kind of a surfboard so that you can best surf it as safe as possible. But things are moving very, very quickly. And so our goal is really to talk more about, like Lexi, you mentioned, just the big picture, the concepts, the frameworks, the ways of thinking, some of the upside, the potential wins that AI provides, and also some of the concerns and some of the places where things fall short, or we need to adapt our capacities and our thinking and our workflows so that we can most safely and most accurately take advantage of this technology. So there's a lot to learn here, and as we always say, Lexi and Sunita, a lot of this information, it's moving so quickly that a lot of the information, could potentially be outdated quite quickly. But what we want to do is give you some frameworks and some ways of thinking and some concepts that will be durable and that will last you and be, something you can apply over and over again. Sort of frameworks of thinking.
It's I think that it's so important to you frame this point, Lexi, cognitive preservation, and I think Sunjay, what you're calling out of like things are changing so rapidly, and all of us, no matter what you do or where you're applying kind of AI in your life, we're all feeling this in some way. I think where it's just the way that we go about our days is massively changing, and how that changes how your brain works. I know I'm, acutely thinking of that. And so I think the concept of having frameworks that we can then take, it's not about like knowing how to master, this tool or that tool, but there'll be new tools that come out every week. And so how are you staying on top of just making sense of it all is really the point of what you guys are doing, which is so great. So I really appreciate that framing.
And I wonder if this is always my favorite part about catching up with you both, but Sandra, I'm wondering if you can share like how are you currently using AI in your clinical practice?
Yeah, wonderful. And it's super, yeah, it's absolutely evolving, and my thinking is absolutely evolving as well. The experience, I think, kind of goes in ebbs and flows. I think there's several ways that I use AI in general, right? So obviously, there's consumer grade AI platforms like ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini. Those are the top three that I end up using, and I use them all the time. And and as we've talked, and I think it's really important for people to understand that you want to be moving from platform to platform. You want to be using them all basically, and cross comparing them and letting them all get to know you and kind of build an understanding of who you are, what you're working on, what your thinking patterns are, et cetera. You don't want to be married to just one system, and you also want to play them off each other. So I do that a lot. I also use a lot of what I call medical grade AI platforms like Consensus or Open Evidence. And those are great for more research-based applications. And are better at not hallucinating, but still can, right? Even Open Evidence can. So don't get too comfortable with it. And then building a lot now in AI, and we're actually launching a new really exciting offering in our clinic called Vitos, the Vitality Operating System. And so this is our what we're looking at is building a really a vitality-based health span longevity movement. And so we've been just building a lot in AI, taking labs, building an index, building a score. We can track that over time, generating reports using Claude Code, and also understanding some of the limitations, right? So I was vibe coding this, I was building it on my own, and I was getting variations on this score, this index score. It wasn't big, right? Usually sub 1 point variations, but like little things would wiggle. I was like, you know what, that's not acceptable. Like, this is not going to work for me. I'm very detail oriented, and I really like things to be, super tight, and the data has to be super tight. And so, as we'll talk, LLMs are probabilistic, they're not deterministic. And so things can shift a little bit. Data can shift every time. If you copy and paste a question, you run it several times, you'll get mostly similar, but slight variations. So heads up on that. So building inside of AI, and then also, Sunita, you mentioned just kind of in this bigger sphere of looking at what other people are building out there, helping other companies, advising, thinking a lot about where this is going and what the potentials are. And they're enormous. The potentials are enormous, right? And so before we started recording, we were talking about that I just spent the weekend at this longevity conference called Vitalist Bay, and everybody's talking about AI. Everybody is talking about AI, right? And so everyone is kind of tinkering in their little AI sandboxes and building. So yeah, just very, very fascinating to see the whole spectrum.
I love that. And you know what and this is a perfect transition to going into this new clinician vocabulary is what's so awesome about the example that you just shared is like this is the result of all of these compounded practice rounds that you've had for these foundational skills, right? It all essentially started with you prompting AI to create a summary based on sleep data and create these annual summaries. And so to see the evolution of you now creating this whole, second clinical brain and operating system, I think is just such a cool example to share about what happens when you actually refine a lot of these skills. And so with that, I wonder if it's okay, Sunita, to kind of dive into this new
Yeah.
clinician vocabulary. So over the past couple of years, we've actually coined some terms that I think help to put a name to these new skills that, and I say new with air quotes if you're just listening and not watching, but new skills in the sense that they're skills that you already do during your clinical practice, but there's just a slight context shift in you using it in the, with AI in your current clinical practice. And so some of these terms are really meant to help identify what these new skills are. And so one of them is actually called friction mapping. And I want to just kind of briefly go into this with you, Sunjya, but what is friction mapping and how do you actually do that in your clinical practice?
Yeah, so I think friction mapping is a really interesting concept, and it's basically like trying to figure out, what do you do on a given day? What is your, beginning to end workflow, right? Today is a Monday. Hopefully most of you got to take some downtime over the weekend, weren't working too much. So you open up your computer, your screen, your patient, load on Monday morning. And what do? Right? You review some charts, you look at some labs, you look at your schedule, if you have procedures or IVs you have to do, there's various just nuts and bolts things that have to happen during the day, right? And so some of those until the end of the day, right? So when you put your computer away, and hopefully that's not at 8 or 9 p.m., is at 5 or 6. So it's that experience of that workday. What are you doing? How are you doing it? What feels like gives you a sense of ease and excitement and kind of charges you up versus what feels like, oh gosh, I really wish I didn't have to do that. And that's a pain, and that's causing me to feel tired and stressed and overwhelmed, and that's leading to me putting in a lot of what we call pajama time, work after hours when you're trying to finish up and clean up. And so that's the friction, right? And so we like people to think about, and you can use AI for this, but you can talk to AI, you can input to AI what your workday is like, what your procedures are like, what your different clinical needs are, and you can have discussions and analysis around those friction points, right? So, Sunita, I'd love to hear also from you, how you. So I think it's also super important. Actually, we can broaden this. Certainly, this is a clinically applicable concept, but it's also a concept you can use in your daily life, right?
Mhm.
You can do this in any aspect of your life using AI, and even on very personal level. So you can, many people have built an AI coach, right? That knows them. It knows your work life. It knows your work brain. It knows, personal stuff about you. You can give it access to your emails or your voice notes or whatever it is. And you can inform that. Actually, Sunita, I don't know if you want to jump in. We had lunch a couple
Yeah.
weeks ago, and you kind of really enlightened me with. Do you want to jump in a little bit on that?
Sure. Yeah.
Kind of that
Yeah.
personal coaching side of AI friction
Absolutely.
mapping.
Yeah, I mean, what a fun time to be a CEO and founder, and to have like the ability to have this constant stream in your ear of like sense checking of if you need that. So yeah, I built my own coach via Claude now. I've kind of gone back and forth between Claude and ChatGPT, and I framed it in the style of a coach that I really respect, who has a lot of content out there actually. So you can suck that in and kind of train it and say, okay, I want you to be, this, I want you to respond to me in this way. And then I've also now upgraded a few things like my Enneagram type and, other things that it might, other ways that I can kind of I know myself, and so then I can help it also see like what are my blind spots. I've had my whole team do an Enneagram, so as it's coaching me, it's also helping me think about like these are the different kind of framings that your team might need or might want to hear. And so yeah, I do find it to be and then I've built my own automations around like kind of a mini chief of staff or things like that. So beginning of the day, end of the day, helping me kind of frame up what I have coming for the day. And it's pulling across everything from email and Slack and my calendar. And so it can kind of see everything. But yeah, I think there's now this omniscient capacity that it gives me, where I'm not the one who has to constantly be just like running through the task list. It can actually help me pull out from across all of these different things and then help me think about this is how you might want to organize it. Now, it doesn't always, it's I would say it's like 80% there. So that's the challenge, which we might get into later, which is like there's it's still even the more I invest in improving it, it gets there and then it misses other things. And I have to constantly, there's constantly kind of like a feedback loop that can be kind of tiring to really get right. So I'm curious to hear about how that plays into some of the other themes that you guys will talk about.
Totally. I wonder if we can. So there's two terms that actually come to mind, which is this idea of and this concept of AI error vigilance, which Sunjay, I would love to hear how you practice that, and exactly what you just talked about, Sunita, which is like this fatigue that's coming from reviewing these AI outputs. And the last time we were all together, we talked about this idea of like thought tourism, and that when you're so reliant on the AI to generate insights for you, it's almost like you're on this tour of somebody else's thoughts. And it robs you of the ability to actually inhabit that whole process for you that you can take into refining your practice moving forward. So I think we can probably piece that into two conversations because they're both big topics. But yeah, Sunjay, how are you practicing AI error vigilance? Because it feels super important with so many things being automated with AI now.
I love where this conversation is going, and we're definitely taking we had AI error vigilance, we had friction mapping in our sort of notes to talk about, but I think this broader conversation is super important. Let's talk about AI error vigilance in the clinical practice first. So, but Sunita, you mentioned that in your own personal experience using these chatbots as a coach, et cetera. And I think that 80% number is really interesting because I find that's about right when you're like trying to vibe code something, you're trying to like, so hack something together on your own. You can very quickly get to something that's quite cool, but then getting it the next, 10, 15, 20% is actually quite hard. And
Totally.
so, I know that, as a founder, Sunita, you also experiencing that just running a company, right? It's just like, the devil's in the details, as with everything.
Yeah.
But when we think about AI error vigilance in the clinical practice, Lexi, you touched on this idea of thought tourism, where, if I before AI, I'm seeing a patient, I'm writing my note, or I would maybe sometimes handwrite stuff and then dictate it afterwards, but nothing goes in the note if I didn't put it there, right? So like when you're typing stuff during a visit, you're only putting things that you intend to be there and nothing else lands into that note, right? But when now I'm using an AI scribe, and the scribe is, listening, quote unquote, alongside me and generating a transcript. And there's a very different part of my brain now that has to work once the visit's over and that transcript is generated, and I am reviewing that note, and I'm trying to read through it and understand, what is it saying? Is it all correct? Is it not correct? And we talk about this idea of like a breadcrumb trail, right? Now things are appearing in the note which you didn't necessarily put there. And so you're trying to like, and you've lost this breadcrumb trail that we used to have, right? Of tracking that data and that information. And so most of the time it works great, it works okay. But if you're tired or you're stressed or you're pressed for time, or, you're just multitasking, you're thinking about other things, there's a risk that things land in that note that weren't, fully signed off by you, and that's a real risk, right? Because when you create that note and you sign off on that information, that you're taking responsibility for it, right? And so um, but it goes a lot deeper, right? So we're thinking a lot, the fatigue that happens through this kind of medical tourism side, but you know, AI can enhance our capacity cognitively, absolutely. But there's several stages, that we might go through this sort of cognitive offloading stage where we're like, okay, this is an amazing tool. I'm going to use it to do X, Y, and Z for me, and then I'm gonna boost my efficiency by 10x, et cetera. But I think then you also, and we're seeing this increasingly, where you run this risk or reality of what's called cognitive surrender, where you just kind of like accept what the AI gives you because you get so used to it and it looks really good. So sometimes you can miss the details because you have to read it quite carefully, right? And this is not just in medical, it's not just in writing our notes, it's not just in interacting with AI as a health coach, it's in all aspects of AI. The coders, the engineers, they're all experiencing this. And Ezra Klein had a great article about this in the New York Times 3 or 4 weeks ago, if you want to read that. And he's just talking about this real shift that we're seeing. I think it's actually changing our brains, just to like the way we think, the way we work. And so, yeah, there's a big open question there, sort of what this is, what it's looking like, where is it going, where is this going in the future as we get more and more trusting and reliant on AI. So there's a lot to think about. Lexi, how are you seeing this in your work and in practice, et cetera? How's this showing up for you?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think about, the last 20%. It's like this vigilance to catch the errors, but it also is, the human element that you would only be able to catch for your current work process, Sunita or Sunjya, right? That someone who maybe was just walking into, how you structure meetings or your week or your clinical visit might not even catch the 20% gap because they just don't have the experience to even recognize where the gaps are. And so it's this tension that I feel like we're holding of like, yes, you want to catch the AI error vigilance or, be vigilant about any AI errors and also preserve that uniqueness that you bring to the interpretation and the translation to patients. So, for me, I've started to notice that there's almost this fatigue of reading AI generated content where you immediately recognize it. You almost like emotionally detach from it because it wasn't this direct communication from the human being. And, I think about like back in the day when you used to be so strict about grammatical, errors in emails. And now when people are just responding as if they're talking to you, I almost receive it in a different way because I know that that's just a genuine communication from someone than just an AI generated response that maybe, they were in a rush or, didn't take the time to actually communicate that. So I'm taking the opportunity of the errors that AI is still making as a way to still preserve that human element with patients. And like, okay, I can rewrite this as if I'm talking to you or even voice dictate it. So that's how I'm receiving it. But again, this has happened, even in the past 6 months of us, consistently using AI and having those new tensions actually surface through the development of that.
Yeah, one thing I love about this conversation is just that we're all just all three of us are being really curious and intentional about living in both worlds. We're very excited about AI. We use it all the time. We're building on top of it. We're building companies. We're building patient offerings. Like, we're basically all in. But we're also really like trying to think about like, how does this feel? How does it show up? What are the best practices? How do we, take the good, but also try to improve the bad? And, but at the same, like really at the end of the day, like how do we have the best connection with people while using this technology? And that's a really interesting tension right now.
And I was actually thinking about, go ahead, Sunita.
Oh, well, I was going to say, I think it's such an interesting point you bring up too, Lexi, of just the not only like how are you as clinicians kind of going through your work, but how do you think you are being perceived as you use AI? And I think that is also really interesting like there'll probably be some sort of evolution that we're all going through of how we perceive more AI generated, content as a certain way, and what does it mean when something has more of a human touch, and how are you like distinguishing between those things? And so important to think about that, excuse me, um, as a clinician who's running a practice like this that is more centered around human connection, and that's actually why people are working with you. And so I think there is some really important um, framing to understand there, to remember like what is your special sauce, and how do you have AI help around all the things but not replace what your special sauce is.
Mhm. And I think, Sunjay, you do this quite masterfully with the term that we've also coined, which is this idea of collaborative co-review, which is how you actually like meet the moment of a patient coming to a visit, already having chatted with AI about their health, and how you might also review an AI generated, dashboard with a patient in the context of a visit. So can you share how you do that in a visit?
Yeah, great. And Sunita, just to like double click on your point of like how are we perceived
Right.
for this, interest and application and using AI, and it's actually pretty bipolar, honestly. Like it's some patients are super excited. They're like, this is awesome. I'm using AI myself. I'm using ChatGPT and Claude, and I have all my health data in there, and I'm so excited that you're meeting me there, and you want to understand. You're also doing this, and because they see AI as a real boost and as a really powerful thing. And some patients are really skeptical, like they don't want to read anything that sounds like AI, and they want me and us to be the experts and to have all the knowledge in our heads. And there's some sense of using AI as cheating, right? If they say, yeah, if I was going to use AI, or if I wanted AI, I'll just do it myself. I'm paying you to be my doctor, and I want the answers to come from you. And so it's definitely a fine line. I definitely find that AI is a value add, and I'm using it, in my visits with patients. I'm, searching in real time, generating evidence-based answers to questions, and I really do feel like it helps me a lot. Right? I'm not giving up. I'm not letting go of my knowledge. If anything, none of the chatbots have the degree of functional medicine experience that we have as clinicians. And so, but they do surface different aspects of a differential diagnosis or a lab test that maybe is a value add that wasn't at the top of my head that day, or some sub theory, or a pathophysiological mechanism, et cetera. So I have found it really, really helpful.
Can I ask,
So
Sunjay, how you sorry to interrupt for a second, but just to like really focus on that, can you give us an example of how you weave in the sort of referencing of AI in your actual visit? Because I think
sure.
I would imagine the way you do that also will like could really create a lot of confidence or break a lot of confidence. So you
Yeah,
must
yeah,
be
yeah.
quite masterful about how you do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so that is, to Lexi's point, this concept that we call collaborative co-review, right? Where I might be searching in different platforms during a visit, kind of behind the scenes, right? Because I'm on Zoom with everybody. And then when I have something that I want to share with the patient, I'll say to them, I'm using, this medical grade AI, or I'm using this AI, that I've trained on our clinic, information. And I always want to kind of run some things by you, right? And I'll even do a screen share and say, hey, here's what we talked about. Here's some details, and here's a bunch of things, listing off some things, on that output that we've already done. But here's some other directions that maybe we haven't talked about yet. And that's been really helpful in a lot of instances, because people can, we can kind of have this real-time conversation about it. And they might tell me, oh yeah, actually I did that with a GI specialist, or yeah, I did that with the neurology, and so, or okay, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that, or no, that's never been talked about. And so like kind of like together we're kind of finding this path. And I'm super open about that, because, I think I learn from my patients every day, and and I think that it's really a collaborative relationship, right? But there have been times when that's gone wrong. That experience of me, sharing what I'm looking at, or running stuff by the patient. And I think there's been times, for example, when I got a little bit surprised. Like I thought the patient was going to be really excited and to find it motivating, but they were frustrated or they were overwhelmed or they're having a lot of brain fog that day, or it was too complicated and it's just too much information coming at them, and so they just left feeling like whoa, what was that kind of thing, and so I've had experiences because we ask for feedback after every visit from our patients. And so one patient in particular was like, what, that was really didn't work. I was, too confusing and, that was frustrating, et cetera. But then once they received my notes and they kind of went through it again, they okay, actually, I get it. Like that was actually helpful. And, so it took them a minute. But yeah, you kind of have to gauge where the patient is at. What's their degree of technological capacity and interest? How much information can they receive? But there's also a really interesting turn, I think, happening in society where I think more people are frustrated with AI and concerned about AI and have a negative viewpoint of AI. And so, it's not going anywhere. It's here to stay. It's gonna continue to expand and grow. But there is this, again, that dynamic tension that we're seeing.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's such an interesting uh kind of learning that you've had. And I feel like the other piece that I think is so important to keep in mind is that, a patient could go ask AI a set of questions that might be very similar in some ways, but they're not going to be the same. And that's actually what the value is of you as the expert, kind of working with AI in a way that you've created your own harness around how it's responding, what you're looking for, what you're asking it. Whereas if I'm, as layperson, kind of going in and trying to, I won't get that far. I won't get the same kind of depth of response. And so it feels important for patients to also understand that, who don't maybe understand that, like, sure, you could go also ask AI these things, but you likely won't get the same responses because you might be asking things in a very different way.
And
100%. Yeah, go ahead,
assigning of
Lexi.
the
Yeah.
meaning. What I love about your example too, Sandra, is like the assigning and the translation of meaning from those outputs. And something that we've also talked about that I think is also really interesting is like, what is the patient asking AI when they're not in the visit with you? Because that also helps to enlighten you and how you show up better for the next visit, to say like, okay, what were gaps in what we shared, during our discussion during the visit that you felt like you needed to ask AI, and that will help focus maybe like what we spend our time on the next time we meet, or I can now see what's important to you as part of this action plan where I may be triaging
Yeah.
it slightly differently. So that's another, I would say, another really big benefit to like having this open dialogue with patients about use of AI.
And most patients, or many patients, not most, I would say not yet most, but many patients are using it. And so they're bringing in, sort of an AI report, it's the new version of, I Googled this and what do you think, doctor, about this? And so they're bringing their chatbot. But yeah, to all those points, their level of prompting is not as robust. Heads up out there, everybody, check out a platform called Prompt Cowboy, really, really good platform for, as they say, turning your lazy prompt into a really good prompt. But prompting matters. How you build a prompt really matters. And then also, at this point, my instance of ChatGPT, my instance of Claude, my instance of Gemini have learned from me, right? They've learned from, more than a year, a couple of years almost now, of me asking it questions, me feeding it information, building projects. And so that brain, that sort of peripheral AI brain, is preloaded with a lot of information that's very specific to our clinic and our patients, not HIPAA compliant data, but questions that I have around the work, around the patients, around different health conditions, et cetera. So that's going to be a very, very different output than the general person querying.
Mm-hmm. And something that I'm also thinking of with this AI error vigilance that I feel like is a new part of it is with the, the resurgence of agentic AI, and having some AI error vigilance around how those agentic workflows are actually getting executed, the boundaries of those workflows within your clinical practice. So I think even the foundational skills that we're talking about today will even expand because the capacity of AI in clinical practice will expand too. But that feels like even a new skill that's come in like the past 6 months that, if you're starting to build these operating systems, that it is something that you want to build in to how you're actually evaluating that workflow.
Yeah. So quick definition for folks out there. So
Real
AI, prompting an LLM, a large language model, that's what Claude is, that's what ChatGPT is, that's what Gemini is. You ask a question, it gives you an answer, pretty simple back and forth, can be quite high yield. You can then build projects and skills and things that are sort of like preloaded with information, and then sort of, can build, different workflows. And then this idea of an agent is something which can act on your behalf and take care of different tasks. And it gets very, very complex if you want. Also simple, but these things can do an incredible amount of work at this point. I was at this conference, I was learning super fast, and people are talking about, what agent harness are you using? And sort of like, how you put these agents together, how you stack them, how they talk to each other, what levels of control you have over them, what they can do on their own. And so, yeah, lots of different layers to this. Sunita, I'm curious on the ultralight side, what feedback are you getting from patients and also providers on sort of this dynamic tension that we're talking about of AI and AI output versus human touch, conceptualization, concepts, written words, etc.?
Yeah, well, we don't have patient-facing AI in Ultralight at this moment, and that is intentional. And the whole goal of our platform is first to be supporting the patient-clinician relationship and really ensuring there's a clinician in the loop before anything goes out to patients. And so everything, the way that AI is currently working in Ultralight is it really acts as kind of a thought partner and a first draft of content, and that as a clinician, it's your practice, your patient relationship. So you're really reviewing that before you send anything through. And so yeah, so we actually are doing a bunch of work right now because we were seeing, our AIs, our initial kind of reliability and accuracy. We were seeing that it started to degrade compared to where it was, and this is actually naturally happening across many systems as your context windows get greater and your tools get greater. And so, we are in the middle and are launching a bunch of work to improve and solidify that. And that's where I think, the difference between kind of vibe coding and kind of a system that's built for this really come into play, because it's very, very complex. Like, it is much more complex than you'd imagine on how you can take in, scanning different types of test and diagnostics data and making sure that the AI is understanding and parsing all the information from each of those different types of documents, and then structuring it in the right way, and then using that structured data. And while it seems like you can feed all this to Claude and it kind of can do it, it actually, to your point, it'll kind of, it'll do something, and then you won't notice what it is and isn't doing unless you really dig in. And then especially as you keep adding to it, it will start to degrade, or will kind of lose track of what it has been working on because of the context limits in current kind of LLMs. And so, yeah, it's something that we are paying a lot of attention to, and are building a lot of like our whole eval framework around. And so, yeah, and it's I say this not because like people are hitting this all the time, but they're hitting it in enough where it's important for us to make sure that we minimize that as much as possible. And so that's definitely our mission on making it deeply clinical grade AI. And so, yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing and learning real time.
Yeah, I know that's probably like a bit of a stressful experience at times. You're kind of hitting the boundaries at times of the capacity of these platforms. But on the other hand, your company, other companies in this space, are I've seen this also with other folks I'm working with. But I really appreciate that you and these other folks are building here and working to really expand the capacity of what we're seeing AI able to do. I know at times it probably feels like, wow, we have a big bug to patch, or like, let's fix this as quick as possible. But it's like, I think of this whole thing as like the frog in the hot pot of water, right? You just kind of like, we're building, we're kind of adjusting to this new experience, this new reality. And then, it feels maybe extra stressful for a minute, and then we kind of push past that and we get to this next phase. And so that's what we really want everyone out there to be thinking about. If we're getting too complex for you, or if we are confusing you, don't worry about that. That's natural. and just keep learning, keep asking questions, keep trying these things out. And the more you do that, the more you start to see what the capacity is, and then you adjust. And then now all of a sudden you are in a new spot. Like, whoa, I didn't realize I was this tech savvy, or I knew this much about AI, et cetera. And so, yeah, just a word of, I like to educate people on there.
Yeah. Well, that's why I kind of love your framework, and kind of what you are doing is helping set expectations too around where things are today, what's normal to run into. So like I think this concept of AI error vigilance fatigue, like the idea that, constantly now looking for, if you have all this AI work kind of going in work streams that you're reviewing, and now your work has shifted from doing the creation of all of that work to now a review mode. You're more of a manager. And this is happening, I think, across many different lines of how people are using AI. I see this on my engineering team, that it's less of like you're actually in there writing code, you're reviewing code as if you were a manager of many, many engineers. And it's a different way of
Yeah.
thinking about your brain and your cognitive function, but it's also, and so I think it does feel, kind of like a weird stress at first, because it's like your brain is shifting, but it's important to note that this is expected, I guess, is kind of what your framework is sharing with us.
And it actually is, it reminds me of a skill that we've also coined, which is this idea of iterative refinement, where
Mm,
you're rarely ever accepting the first output from AI regardless, and that it is a skill to learn how to push it, to
Love that.
refine the output, refine the prompt. And just to both of what you both are saying is like this is a really familiar skill. Like you can have the same treatment plan that you give anybody that has insulin resistance that has the same components, but you're going to refine that plan over time to make it very personal to the patient. And from a practice operation standpoint, like I think about it when you get a new lab test in your clinic, and you send out the first patient to get the first lab done, and then you figure out all these sticky points that you didn't even realize with your current SOP. So you refine that process so it gets smoother over time. Super familiar skill set that you apply to actually applying this new utility in your clinic, which is AI. So to just kind of hone in on that, like this is it's a new term and a new application, but still a familiar skill that many clinicians practice.
yeah, I love that. And iterative refinement also requires being in the sandbox playing around in the first place, right? So you're in
Mhm.
there working, you're trying things out, something comes back at you and you're like, okay, that was helpful and this is not, and I'm going to fix this part. And so it's also really a reality if anybody in the audience is vibe coding at all, where you're using, these coding platforms to tinker and to try to build stuff for your clinic or for yourself or just for fun. Same concept, right? It gives you an output, this is really cool, I'm going to keep that. This isn't working, there's a bug here, or I don't like that. And now you can just in real language tell it, or you can literally take a screenshot and you can feed it back in and say, okay, fix this, I don't like this, or make this different. And so the AI actually is really powerful for helping with iterative refinement. I think that's, going back to our starting point today with friction mapping, et cetera. Same thing, right? To figure out where your friction points are, figure out now where your friction points are with using AI. We should think about that, Lexi, like friction mapping for our use of AI has an interesting
Yeah.
wrinkle.
Totally.
Uh, but use AI as your thought partner in that, because it is like this always on, always available, eager to please, sometimes too much, but eager to please, very helpful assistant. And we used to think of our AIs as like assistants at the level of a medical student, and then maybe at a resident, and now they're like super scientific PhD level helpers, or like, so like they're just getting better and better. But it's still sticky, and the iterative refinement process is really, really important. So just get in there, play around, stay curious, think about it, because your brain starts to think about it offline. You're like, oh, I want to try that, or oh, what about this? And then, so yeah, there's lots of different levels.
And I think that I love yeah, I think the iterative refinement is so critical. And I feel like there's also maybe an understanding. I'm curious how you both think about this, is like when is when do you kind of throw in a towel of something like not working? Or when do you keep, when do you keep going? Because I feel like that's something that's come up for me recently. Like I was working on a deck recently with Claude Design for an upcoming presentation, and it's really amazing in some ways, and then it was like really tricky and dropping things and dropping details and not kind of the level of uh, the level of detail that I need or I'm used to having in just when I work with a regular deck. And so there is like I think going into anything now, this work to me, I'm curious if you approach it this way. I always have a calculation of how long I think it's going to take. And then like comparing it to what it used to take. And obviously in my head, the only reason I use Cloud Code is because I'm like, this is going to be so much faster and it's going to come out with a better output. But I think the raw time I put into it might actually be longer and the output was maybe the same, compared to what. And so I'm curious how you guys think about, I think some of the that trade-off between the quality of output and the time.
Do you want to go first, Sunjya?
Yeah, that's a deep concept. I think there's a lot of factors. Um, a lot of that for me is based on, deadline, like what's my end point, like when do I have to get this out the door by, based on energy, based on, what's my focus level or my fatigue. I'm just like, I don't want to work on this anymore. I got to get this finished and move on to the next thing. So there's a lot of different levels to that. But your points are so good, which is this, that AI certainly has this reputation for increasing our efficiency, but there's also a lot of times when, oh my goodness, many hours have passed and you're still not where you need to be. And like, what if we had just done it the other way, right? Where build a manual deck. I recently had to do a really long presentation of like 5 hours of content. And so I was like, started off like, I love the output sometimes that, Notebook LM or Gemini or Claude can give with slides. But then the slides are really hard to change because it's like one block of information. And so any little change has to redo the whole slide. And then sometimes something drops off. And that was just really got painful. And so I just built a separate workflow around that where I used, the outline and then just put that into another platform called Gamma. And I was able to build the slides much more quickly and also with more control over editing them. The final output was not as beautiful as my very like design focused brain likes. But I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do, because that's the time I have and I got to get this out the door and I got to get this presentation recorded, but then I think I'll come back to it, right? I'll continue to iterate that over time and the tools are continuing to improve. But yeah, Lexi, what about you?
Yeah, it is a tough question because we try so many AI tools and we try to I it's hard to honestly let go because they're going to develop so quickly over time, especially as you use it more. But I would say my boundary is just that process. Like how easy is it to actually refine and iterate the final output? That's usually what will determine if I keep using a tool. And for the very reason, like I was using Claude to create presentations, but I noticed that like I would be waiting minutes every single time it was updating the presentation every single time versus me just tweaking a couple bullets here and there if it were just in PowerPoint. Now I take that as like a great opportunity to weave in movement snacks. I'm like, okay, this is my opportunity while I'm waiting to
Yes, it's great.
jump. Like I can do some quick squats for the 90 seconds that it's waiting. And also, I think having an intention of what you are looking for as the final output, especially for something like a presentation or, even an email, has helped me a lot because AI is super creative. And so it's so easy for me to get detoured onto like what's possible for AI, which distracts me from what my original intention was for that presentation. And so I think having like a final idea of what you want to end up with has helped a lot with determining like how far you push a certain AI tool. And then how easy the refinement process is also another deciding factor. But everything that you also said, and you too, Sunita, like it's so complex to figure out where your boundaries are. And there's so many factors that influence, when you actually cut it off.
Yeah, one thing and we're getting a little bit afield from our intended conversation. Another really important point, and then we should regroup and maybe have some time for questions. But yeah, I've just been thinking a lot about exactly what you just talked about, which is like working with these tools. It fractures my attention and it fractures my time management capacity because of how they work, the little bit of a delay between output or or maybe I'm leaning on them more than I was before. And so I'm always like, maybe I'll ask AI about this, or I'll ask AI about that before. So I think it's really important to like really think deeply about what you are thinking about and what your ideas are and what's your differential diagnosis and what's your plan for the patient before you really start asking AI. Because otherwise you just go down all these rabbit holes. And especially when you're like vibe coding, you're building something that's exact thing of that time delay, it's really hard to do that and to also do anything else while you're waiting for that. And so I feel like it's just really going to be, or is already, a pretty big problem for a lot of our brains, and especially with our tendency to be sort of screen focused and fractured attention, low attention span, tendency towards ADD, ADHD, just like the general trend of our society with social media over the last 10 years, I think is accelerating. So a lot of interesting concepts there to dive into in a future talk.
Oh yeah, I know we have to transition, but I've been thinking about this too, about like how my thoughts feel like they're almost leapfrogging, right? Because now I
Yeah.
know that there's a time delay to get the output. Now my brain's constantly thinking about like, okay, what can I start now, knowing that I'll probably tackle it
Yeah.
3 hours later. Or I'll be sitting in bed just being like, should I start this research project tonight so I can wake up and review the output and download all
Right.
thoughts? So it is this entirely new behavior shift to
Yep.
adjust to how the AI is actually giving you the output. So
Like just constant multi-processing.
yeah,
Multi-processing, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah,
also, like I talked about during my visits, I'm multitasking a lot,
yeah.
like looking stuff up and researching while talking and listening. And so, whereas having an AI scribe and having that be great because it creates my note for me, technically that should make my I can focus even more, and that is a benefit. You can definitely do that more with scribes. But then if you're also cross-referencing and searching, you have to be really careful and really intentional about how much does that fracture your attention during a visit too. So a lot of layers.
Mhm.
That's great. Yeah, I think this is such a rich conversation of just how, we even, as you guys have put this framework together, it continues to evolve as like how we're using AI keeps moving. But I feel like there's, a few things that, that one, I think the friction mapping is a really powerful framing. Of understanding where are you both just in your general clinical practice and even with your use of AI, where are you finding friction and kind of being very clear about that. The AI error vigilance that you called out is a big skill that we're all kind of thinking about and being more mindful of. And I'm curious also, yeah, I guess I know there's probably a few more points that you wanted to land, so I'll come back to my final point. But yeah, any other kind of core competencies, I guess, in this new framework that you think it'd be great for people to leave with?
I would love, I know it's a big concept, but Sunja, you've coined this term of competency compression, which I think is a
Mm.
super important concept that I think we can end with or capstone this conversation with, because it kind of ties into this idea of AI error vigilance. But I wonder if you could share with the audience what that is, because that has stuck with me ever since you created
Mm.
that term.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, AI has an incredible capacity to provide us with information very quickly at an incredible depth. It knows most of the information out there on the internet. It continues to get better. And so just like that, the ability to like ask it questions and have it generate information back to us is really powerful. And for us as clinicians and in the medical field, that's definitely a value add. But what's interesting to me also, and this is what we've talked about with this term competency compression, is like it's almost like it really has the ability to level up a more junior clinician who maybe doesn't have a lot of experience or doesn't have a lot of in-depth training across all aspects of medicine or functional medicine, whatever field you're in, um, with some potential problems or pitfalls, meaning that person is now actioning on information which they don't cognitively own, and so they don't know, necessarily what some of the risks are, what some of the potential side effects of the protocol are, or what safety labs to always look at, or different, both small and large things, or different nuances of that protocol, where it might fail or where it might really succeed, et cetera. And so there's some cautions there, for people using AI that's pushing them above maybe their knowledge base or what they own cognitively. And on the flip side, I think also for the more expert clinician who's been doing this for 15 or 20 years, it's hard to get AI to create an output that is that in depth. It doesn't know everything that we know in our brains. It doesn't know, all the pattern recognition, all the intuition, all the things that we've experienced over tens of thousands of patients, for example, in our practice, right? And so, it's hard to, and the tendency of AI is to have this sort of regression to the mean, from these large language models. And so it's hard from the expert point of view to really get that output that is as deep or as comprehensive or as fluid as what we might think of in clinical practice. And so just a real dynamic tension that I think we all have to be aware of and be thinking through.
It's kind of an ironic exercise, right? To be so reflective about metacognition and how you approach things clinically, that would actually help the AI, produce a better output that's more in alignment with how you think, and you not even being aware of as a clinician and how you actually do that type of pattern recognition in real time. So that's also what I'm finding with this like new evolution of building operating systems is like, how do you actually, create that clinical thinking map that we've talked about, Sunita, in something that the AI can actually replicate. So that way you don't have to do as much AI error vigilance. And is that actually really where we want to head with this? If we want
Yeah.
more of like a decision partner or, more of a operating system.
Yeah, it definitely likens back to like when you're building a team or hiring people or training people, right? Like you like have to impart ways and modes of operating that you can't expect somebody's going to walk into the job and just know it right away. And so it's sort of, a really important thing to keep in mind, I think, when you're working with any of these AI tools of how are you sort of thinking about your own cognitive process as using scribes. I think one thing I think we both I've talked to you both on is just how it's changed how you actually what you say in the visit so that you're very clear about what it's picking up on and what it's going to include in your note that you maybe otherwise wouldn't have kind of been framing.
Yeah, Lexi, do you want to give a quick definition of ambient communication just to bounce off of that? Because it's a really important concept.
Yeah, so it's this idea that the scribe is going to capture everything that you say and also the acknowledgement of everything that happens in your head during a visit that you don't say. And so this new skill of ambient communication is the behavioral shift of actually communicating things in your head that you want the scribe to capture, that's still respectful, right, to the patient that's in the visit, and still kind of goes through your thinking process so that way the scribe can appropriately capture it in the note that it's producing. The most concrete example I can think of is like even doing a physical exam. There's so many things that you're denoting as you're doing a physical exam that you just type in after you do your physical exam that now you can just verbalize. Or when you're doing a lab review, right? Actually saying the numbers out loud and trends that you're noticing versus doing a more high level
Patterns like this is pointing to metabolic dysfunction or insulin
Exactly.
resistance or inflammation.
Exactly. And it's so helpful because you wouldn't even note that necessarily in so much detail in your note. I think you would probably, right, have a bulleted list of the biomarkers, have your clinical impression summary. So it's a win-win situation, right? The patient is more aware of what you're thinking, which a lot of them appreciate
Yeah, the
versus
patients really love it.
silence.
Yeah. Yeah, I've
And you
seen my
realize how
patients.
awkward it is, right? When you're doing a physical exam and you're just silently doing your exam and taking notes.
Totally. Yeah, as a patient, it's so empowering to kind of be hearing more of what's going on in your head. So, well, I know that we're very close to time here, and I didn't see any questions in the chat. I know there's a Q&A button if people have any questions. We can kind of stay a minute, and also happy to follow up on with Lexi and Sunjya's contact info for those who attended. We'll have a follow-up email. But I just, in closing, I'll kind of be monitoring to see if we get any Q&A in. But I just want to say, I think some of the things that I'm left with, one of the most important messages I think that you both shared is just the importance of curiosity and iteration when you're approaching these tools, that like not to get frustrated because the first time you use it, it didn't work or it didn't come out with what you were expecting it to. But also I think to have like realistic expectations about how it meets with like your time, capacity, and you're not investing more than you are, if you're going into, especially I think with vibe coding, there's like a massive risk of a project you think might take, X amount of time, like triples and quadruples, and to get to that last, 100% that you're trying to get it to. And so just being really aware of, the different kind of dimensions of decision making as you're going into it feels so important. So thank you again for this framework. But any parting thoughts from either of you as we wrap things up?
I think you said it best is, I'm so grateful for the curiosity that we have had with AI. And I think all of the learnings that we've been able to share with you have come from our experience and willingness to try new tools and dive deep and figure out what those boundaries are and, what the workflows are to integrate it into practice. And so I totally echo that idea of, being curious, trying the tools, seeing what works, what doesn't work, because it is a trial and error process, no matter what, as you start to frame it to your unique practice.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, thanks. Been a great discussion. Always fun to dive deep with both of you. And yeah, thanks for having us.
That's great. Well, I appreciate it. And thanks for making space. Thanks everybody for joining. And we will be back again with another community session for Ultralight. But thank you both so much for the time, Sunjya and Lexi.
Thank you.
Take care.
Pleasure.